So here's a little bit about me personally, right? So personally, I'm married. So my wife's name is Tiffany. She is the best. And I just had my first child. Her
Oh,
name is Kinsley. Her name is Kinsley Taryn Spry. She's 9 months old, and she
oh,
has me all wrapped around her little finger.
yes.
So that's been really, really great. It's kind of taken my life to the next level, right? Just having a kid and being a husband and all that good stuff. So I enjoy a lot. I love hanging out with my friends. They kind of keep me grounded. So as I grow as a brand, they keep me very, very grounded. I love hanging out. I have a twin sister. Her name's Joy. And so it's Troy and Joy, which my mom was all cutesy, I guess, growing up. So it's actually Keith Troy and Crystal Joy. So it's just,
Cute.
that's a little known fact about me. As far as my work goes, I love what I do. I absolutely love what I do. But what people don't understand is a lot of times they don't get that my pain is what birthed my passion, right? So the way my blog got started, I used to write all the time. I was a writer when I was younger. I was the guy who wrote like love letters for their friends and the poems for their friends when they want to impress a girl. I was that guy.
You did the Cyrano thing, huh?
There you go. I did that stuff. And so ultimately what ended up happening is my mom passed away back in 2011. 2011. And so she had multiple sclerosis. And I had not written for a while because I had graduated college. I was kind of done. I was busy with work, like the corporate life, right? And something told me just to write about it. So my first blog ever was called A Mother's Love.
Mm.
And where I wrote about kind of what my mom meant to me and what it meant now that she was gone. And I just sent it out to social media, right? I didn't even know what a blog was. I just Googled blog and Blogspot popped up. And when I sent it out, ultimately what ended up happening was people wrote me back. They said, I really love your writing. I can really relate to the story that you told when you were writing. Keep writing. And I was like, okay. So then I started writing about what came natural to me. And what came natural to me was relationships. And so I would write about all the issues I would see, the conversations I would have, and all these kind of things. And so I just kept doing that and became consistent with it. And people started asking me for advice. And I thought to myself, okay, people trust me to give them advice because they must obviously buy into whatever it is I'm saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then I was on Twitter one day and saw a guy that was a relationship coach. His name's Stefan Labassiere. He's one of the top relationship coaches. And I reached out to him and I said, "What's a relationship coach?" And he got with me. He told me how to get certified as a coach. Told me what it was all about. And so that's where my brand kind of was born from. So that's how I'm doing the work that I'm doing today. So the blog became the brand, which became a movement. So that's where I am now.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit, Troy, about your own journey. I think you said toward and through marriage, right?
Yes, ma'am. So what people don't know is my wife and I actually met in college, right? But we were, boyfriend, girlfriend, and we didn't get married till I was almost 30 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And people always ask, like, what took you so long? And what they don't understand is that for a man, the transition from being a student to becoming a career man to becoming a grown man that knows about responsibility to becoming a husband, that's a huge leap. And it's kind of counterproductive to what we're taught growing up, right? What we're taught growing up are things like, soar your wild oats, or, we kind of get notches on our belt for talking to a bunch of different women. We're never really shown the true value of a wife unless you came up in a great home, with two-parent household and your parents got along and all this stuff. If you came up like that, then you may have had that great example. For a lot of men, though, they don't have that example. And so all they have is what they hear from their friends or from other people. So my journey was one of trying to figure out who I was as a man first, and then saying, okay, not only what is a husband, but what is the value of being a husband and what is the value of having a great wife? And so I had to do a lot of self-reflecting because honestly, I was a really selfish person in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Very selfish. It was very much so about me and what I wanted and what made me happy. And then I realized that in order to be a great husband, you have to be willing to serve. And so once I had that epiphany, then it made me a way better husband. And I said, okay, it's not about me chasing everyone else or chasing a bunch of women or going out of my way to get notches on my belt. What it really was about was serving someone else and building a foundation together. So that's kind of what the journey looks like. And so even with that journey, what no one ever teaches you though, is that you still have to learn skills beyond the feelings, right? And I think that's the part that I talk a little bit about in my volume 1 of my book is, there's a journey for men, but then there's also these skills that we have to learn in order to be great husbands as well. So that's kind of what my journey was like. And, being married has been the best thing that's ever happened to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find it really interesting that you had this epiphany about serving someone else. And I would say that's probably not what most is going on in most men's heads, at least not until they're a little more mature or experienced, for sure.
Yes.
When it comes to dating, love, and romance. But how did that realization come for you? I mean, how did you have that epiphany? And I guess, how did you go from being, as you described it, very selfish and self-centered in your 20s to suddenly realizing, wow, this could be amazing to serve someone else and be someone's husband?
Yeah. So it's funny you asked that question because it's a very simple answer. I met a guy. I met a guy. So when I was younger, I met a guy at the gym. He was an older gentleman. He was in his 50s. His name was Neil. And I remember in the gym, he used to play basketball with us. Even at that age, he was still really good. And so I would just talk to him. We started doing breakfasts and things like that together as an older man. And I would see him in the gym with his wife all the time. But what I didn't know was that his wife had a double lung transplant.
Wow.
Right. So but he was with her every day in that gym. And so when I started talking to him about that, he kind of gave me the insight in that he was the most selfless person that I had ever seen, because she really wasn't in a condition to do anything for him. Really, not anything. Right. He was pretty much taking care of her, right, until she passed away. But he told me, he said, you know what? It's not about just the sex, right? It's not just about chasing the women. He said it's about the substance, right? And he said that his wife had been such a blessing to him his whole life. There's no way he could turn his back on her. So he was serving her, right? He told me that's what it's about. You got to be willing to serve her. And so to me, that was my light bulb moment. No one had ever to me talked about marriage in that way.
Yeah.
Or talked about being a husband in that way. And I was like, wow, this is like real. So I had to have an example first, and then I started following that example. And what was so funny is once I found that example, he put me around other men who were doing the same things. Right? So I was in a circle of men that were like 20 years older than me. And I was just learning about how to be a better man. Yep. So that's where it came from.
Well, so it occurs to me, Troy, that you're talking about something really interesting here that I don't think we hear a lot about. A couple things stand out for me. One is that I think a lot of men don't have those kinds of role models that you're talking about to model what a good relationship might look like, what being a good husband might look like. Fortunately, you met this man that really inspired you and created a new awareness in you. It also occurs to me, now the situation with this man and his wife was a fairly extreme one where you said he was literally caring for her. But it also occurs to me something that I'm sure you can comment on, and that is that in order for a man to serve a woman, and of course I think under circumstances where both people are healthy, it can go both ways to some extent. But in order for a man to serve a woman, she has to be ready to receive that.
Yes.
And be receptive to that.
Absolutely.
Add to that.
Oh, so I think that's one of the things that a lot of women struggle with, right? Especially as you get older, right, and you become more mature. If you're used to being by yourself, right, or you're used to being hurt, or you're used to being taken advantage of, what happens is you harden up, right? And so a lot of times it's not about loving someone else. It's about allowing yourself to be loved, right? And a lot of us don't know how to allow ourselves to be loved. And so what happens is we butt heads. So there's this struggle, there's this power struggle in relationship all the time. You see it in dating all the time, right? Because no one wants to give in to the other person, or no one wants to let the other person in. I call it leverage. People want to have leverage when they're dating, not understanding that the strength is in vulnerability, right? Is if you can get into that vulnerable place, that's when you know you're making progress. But if you're not doing that, then guess what? You're staying surface level. Both people are staying surface level and you get nowhere. And so you end up maybe with a sexual relationship, or maybe you end up with a lustful relationship, but you never get past the surface.
Mm. Yeah, I'd love for you to say a little more about this whole vulnerability piece, because I know from my own life experience as a woman that grew up in a generation where maybe we had opportunities that women in generations past didn't have for education, for career, and we became very proud. And I'm speaking about myself along with many other women that I know that are listening. We
Mm-hmm.
became very proud of our accomplishments, our independence, our self-sufficiency,
Mm-hmm.
etc. And it's almost like we've become proud of not needing anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it can become really difficult to show what you're calling that vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd love for you to say a little bit more about that too.
Absolutely. So here's the thing. It's funny you said this. I wrote a post about this yesterday, right? And it said there's nothing wrong. You might not need a man, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting someone to build something with, right? Too often we kind of use the word vulnerability as synonymous with weak, right? When in reality, vulnerability is something that you have to have courage to do. You have to be strong to do that, right? It's to let someone in. And I think what happens is this power struggle happened because independence, right? You can't have independence in an interdependent relationship, right? And so no one told women when they became so empowered how to separate the two. So it became, I don't need you. Well, that's okay. But the difference is you actually probably want me though, right? And if you want me, then you have to let me in. And that's where the kind of disconnect came. And I see it all the time with clients of mine, people that say they want love, but they don't want to receive that love, or they don't even want to give it back. So vulnerability is the key to building a healthy, long-lasting relationship. So anybody out there that's listening, vulnerability is the key.
Yeah, I agree with you, Troy. And I want to ask you, how does a woman, especially a strong, self-sufficient woman,
Mm-hmm.
how does she show that vulnerability? Give us a couple of examples, if you can, about how she can express that vulnerability. It feels scary to show the vulnerability. And
Absolutely.
also when we've worked so hard for our own independence and we're wearing this proud badge saying, I don't need a man,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
hard to show it, right?
Absolutely, it is. It's hard for both people, men and women, right? But I think that the first thing you do is you have to be willing to show your flaws,
Mm.
right? You have to be willing to show your flaws because no matter how independent you are, you still have them, right? We all have. It could be physically, it could be emotionally, it could be mentally, whatever it is. The minute you take off that mask and you start showing your flaws and your insecurities and you own those things, when you own your flaws and insecurities and you're willing to let somebody see them, that's vulnerability. That's saying, you know what? I want you to love me anyway. Love me anyway. And I think that's a key. And I think letting people in on your deepest secrets too. That's vulnerability. If you're going to trust somebody to love you, you got to let them in on something other than just where you work and how much money you make, right? So
Mm.
that's a big key to it. The other part is trusting him, right?
Mm.
Trusting him. So that means trusting him to make some decisions, trusting him to lead you sometimes, trusting him, to pick out, the right food to eat instead of you trying to control every single thing, right? Be okay with that. Be okay with trusting him. I think that's where a lot of men struggle with women a lot of times. It's okay. I want to show you some things. I want to lead you. I want to be able to, show you that I'm capable, but you won't even allow me to do that because you want to control everything. And the thing is, when you're vulnerable, when you're in that vulnerable place, the first thing it does, it takes pressure off you, right? It takes some pressure off of you because you don't have to be perfect. You can be completely authentic and you don't have to be the ruler and the controller of everything. So it's a strength in it. It's not a weakness in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like what you said there. And I can't remember where this quote came from. I'm not saying it's original quote of mine, but it said, there is no intimacy without vulnerability. And I've thought about that. And I think one of the reasons that vulnerability can create the potential for intimacy is that I think showing our vulnerability actually makes us more relatable, and it makes it safer for that other person to show their, like you said, flaws or fears, or even I even think of vulnerability as even us sharing our hopes and our dreams.
Yes.
And some of the big ideas we have in our head that we're almost afraid someone else is going to laugh at if we share them, right? So I think sometimes we think of vulnerability as kind of the, you know, the deep dark stuff that we wouldn't want anyone to know about us, that thing that we all have going on inside that says I'm a flawed human being, and if someone really fully knew me, I'd be lovable or I'd be rejected. But I also think it does encompass sharing our hopes and our dreams and our aspirations and things that make our hearts sing. I think that's also a part of showing the vulnerability as well.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I think what happens is there takes some strength to be able to share with people those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's not a lot of people that will always agree with you. And so that's why we don't tell people our dreams, because we're afraid that someone's going to, down them or say they sound silly or they sound stupid. So if you're vulnerable, if you choose the right person, they'll probably support you in those things if nobody else does. So I think what you're saying is exactly right.
Yeah, I can remember when as I shared, I spent 20 plus years in corporate America in some fairly high level jobs. And I can remember when I told my my husband, that I wanted to start this coaching business, that it was a dream of mine. I remember I felt really, really nervous, Troy, because I didn't know how he would react. My husband is an attorney and a CPA. So, we're talking left brain. And
Yes.
he always says, I'm the entrepreneur and he's the intrapreneur.
I agree.
And so I was nervous to tell him, because I thought, how's he going to feel about me doing this totally entrepreneurial thing that's unproven at this point, where I'm leaving a high-level job in a corporate career setting, and I want to do this totally new thing. And it felt very scary to me. But when I shared from my heart what my dream was, he was right on board. It was really beautiful and really amazing.
Nice. And we need that. Everybody needs some support, right? Everybody needs it, even the strong, independent woman.
Yeah, exactly. And I just want to piggyback onto what you also said about this allowing and trusting a man, right? And not feeling that need to control or step up. I like to call this sacred space. This space that you allow, and I actually recommend to my women to both literally and figuratively lean back, because particularly if we're the kind of women that have been in that more masculine energy in our careers, we have to kind of sometimes lean back and relax into that feminine space to create that opportunity for a man, and resist, as you talked about, that temptation to step in and take control.
Yes. It's so funny what happens a lot of times, and you probably have seen this before, where a woman will always step up, right? And then he starts stepping back, and then she gets mad because he steps back. And so it becomes this vicious cycle all the time. He's lazy. Well, no, he's not lazy. You just control everything. Right? Or, he has he has a lot of ambition. He wants to be a man. He wants to lead you, but you step up every time and you undercut him. That's not going to be healthy for your relationship, because there has to be some balance there.
Yeah. So Troy, I know you work with men and women and couples, and I know you have so much wisdom in this area. What do you think, from your perspective, are 2 or 3 key things that would be really valuable for women to understand on a deeper level about men? Because this whole series is about understanding more deeply what's going on in the hearts and minds of men. Because as much as we've all observed and analyzed and watched you, in many ways we're still mysteries to each other.
Absolutely, we are. And you know, and it's great that you're doing things like this to help us understand each other more, because that's the disconnect, right? I always say you have to seek to understand, right? Seek to understand, because I see so many times we expect, and this is the problem I see with women, and so I'm going into the advice I'm trying to give, is so many times we seek to judge before we seek to understand, because we want everyone to act and behave the way we do. So
Yes.
the first thing I think women really have to understand is that we're different. Simple as that. We're different. We do things differently. We think differently. We act differently. And so if you don't seek to understand our perspective and where we come from, then you'll just get frustrated when we don't act the way that you do. Right? So that's one big thing, is seek to understand, right? Second thing is I want women to really get this, because I see this in my audience all the time. You can't just want him to have emotions when it's convenient for you. Right?
Say more about that.
So what I mean by that is, while men and women behave differently when it comes to emotions, we both have them, right? So what you see from a lot of men is they're not allowed to be in that vulnerable place at all with their women, right? They're not allowed to be wrong sometimes, or to be sad, or to be hurt. And what you see a lot of hardened men and a lot of women seeking affection from those hardened men. But what happens is, the minute that he expresses emotion, he becomes weak in her eyes. And that can't be the case. That has to be the moment where she embraces him the most, right? And I think that causes a lot of tension, especially from alpha females, right? Or independent women, or women who have been single for a long time. It's like, hold on, they'll call it you're being soft. Well, maybe he's not being soft. Maybe he's being human, right? And if he's being human, that's where you want him to be. But the thing about a man is this: the minute he becomes human and you don't embrace that, or you shun it, he'll go back to not being human, right? And he'll harden up, and he won't be affectionate. He won't be open, and he won't tell you how he feels. And then you'll be upset, right? So you have to be very conscious of the fact that men behave differently, but we still feel the same way that you guys feel. So does that help a little bit?
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that. And I think that it's so important that you talked about this, Troy, because I do think sometimes as women, our perception of men is they're these strong, unfeeling kind of creatures. And it's interesting because I've even talked to a few women over the years who are almost surprised when they discover how hurt or how painful something is to a man, hurtful or painful something is to a man, almost like they weren't quite aware how deeply they feel and how their hearts can be wounded. And I sometimes think, we think of women as kind of still magnolias. We're kind of the beautiful, soft on the outside, but tough as nails to some extent inside. At least many of us are. We can be very resilient. And I sometimes think it's almost the opposite for men. Sometimes I think, it's that rough, tough exterior, but inside there's some real vulnerability. Men can be deeply wounded and hurt, and their egos and their feelings and their hearts can be wounded in ways that I think oftentimes women don't fully recognize or understand.
Oh, I agree. An area I see this in a lot, it's in when you're in a relationship or in a marriage, a lot of it comes sexually, right? And this is one of those things where it's a difference in men and women, right? A lot of times women kind of need everything else to feel connected, right? Everything but the sex to feel connected. Well, for men, a lot of times they need the sex to be connected, right? They need to feel you, they need to talk, they need to touch you, right? But what happens is she is upset with him, so she rejects him. She rejects him over and over and over again, right? He's not being good enough to get this, right? So that rejection hurts his feelings way more than he'll ever tell you, right? So he hardens up. And he's like, I'm not even going to try anymore. And so now you have a relationship that lacks intimacy mentally, emotionally, and physically. And now it's falling apart. All because his feelings really are hurt, but he's afraid to tell you his feelings are hurt, right? Because he doesn't feel good enough. He doesn't feel like you want him. He doesn't feel like you desire him, right? And so that happens all the time because we don't seek to understand one another. Because if we seek to understand one another, then we get, hey, even if I don't necessarily feel like it, I can't necessarily reject him all the time. You see, because there's something deeper than just the physical part of it. So I think that's one good example of how we have to seek to understand one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. That was very, very good. Very well said. And I think also this rejection piece can also happen by a woman refusing a man's support or help or what he offers to do for her as well. And we talked a little bit about, okay, maybe you don't need a man in some of the more traditional ways that women have needed men to support them or for survival or that sort of thing. But I actually believe, at least from my perspective, it's not just a matter of we want. I think we actually do need each other. I think as human beings, we are designed and created in a way where one of our deepest needs is to have that kind of connection, to love and be loved, to know and be known, to be a part of something, to be supported. And I can recall after being single for 43 years, I was a first-time bride at age 43, as many of you know. I can remember just little things, Troy, like just being able to be a passenger instead of drive the car all the time when I went somewhere, or have someone to run get something at the grocery store that I forgot when I was tired and had already put on my pajamas at night. You know, these little things that seemed like, I never really knew what a luxury it was going to be to have that. And so, you know, I feel like, okay, maybe I didn't need my husband in some of the ways that women think about their mothers or grandmothers needing a man. But I feel like I need that. I feel like it's a need. It's a human need. What do you think?
No, I agree. I agree with you 100% because there's a reason why the worst thing you can do to a human is put them in isolation, right? There's a reason for that. It's because we weren't meant to be alone. And no matter how many friends you have, there's nothing like having a companion, right, that you're either married to or in an intimate relationship with. There's nothing like it. And I think we need that companion. We all, at the end of the day, we all want to matter to somebody, right? No matter how much we love ourselves, we all want to matter to somebody. And think about it like this. Why do you see, adults still seeking approval from their parents, right? Everybody wants to matter to somebody. And we'll do anything to get that approval a lot of times. So if you come to grips with the fact that you actually do need and want someone, then it makes it a lot easier to find that person. Because at some point, what happens is now you open up your heart. Because if you don't, then you start blocking people out. But when you say, I do want someone, and I do need someone, that might be the difference between you smiling at the guy at the bar and having a snarl on your face. You see? So there's a difference in mind space when you come to the conclusion that you do want and need someone.
Yeah, I agree. I think you could be giving off an entirely different vibration, and I think sometimes we're not fully aware that this mindset or these thoughts that might be going on, thinking, I don't need someone, how that's going to show up in how we present ourselves and who we are in our interactions. So I think you're we're spot on with that, Troy. And I want to ask you a little something that I think about from time to time, and especially as I've been doing this series and I've been talking to several men. I think one thing that's come from this for me is that I think the journey of a man can be a lonely journey, particularly if he's not in partnership. I don't think men tend to bond in the same way as women do with their friends. I think men can, because it's a competitive world out there, feel like they're constantly needing to prove themselves. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit from the male perspective, because I think it's an important thing for women to understand.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So you're spot on. In fact, there's a reason why men tend to get together, and it revolves around things like activities, right? Let's go play basketball. Let's go watch the game. Women get together and will sit and drink wine and talk for 5 hours about everything.
It's
right?
true. It's true.
And so we don't do things. We're not socialized the same way. Men don't sit around with their friends talking about feelings, right? So if he's not in partnership, where does he go to do that? Right? He can't just call his best friend and say, I'm really hurt today. I don't feel, I'm not feeling well, or my dog died, or my wife left me, or whatever it is. We don't have those outlets like a lot of women do. And so that's why you see a lot of men that have a lot of mental, disease. They have a lot of depression, and they hold things in. And by the time a guy explodes, he's been holding that in for years because he hadn't had anyone to talk to. He's been hurt for a long time, right? And so I think that's why I always tell women, if you're dating a guy, or you're in a relationship with the guy, you have to allow him to be vulnerable, right? Because he has no other space to do it in. And so the minute that you shun him being vulnerable is the minute you're going to lose him, because he's not going to open back up to you emotionally. So does that kind of help answer your question?
It does. And how does a woman allow for a man to be vulnerable?
I got one key: listen. Right? Listen to him, and don't take it as he's whining. You hear a lot of women say, "My man is always whining," right? He's always complaining about something, or something like that. Well, maybe he needs you to listen. Sometimes, how sometimes when, as a woman, you want to talk and you want him to not try to fix it, you want him to just listen. Well, he wants you to just listen sometimes too. Just listen, hear him out, and don't do it. He doesn't want to be judged. That's the thing. We're judged in everything we do in life, where we work, when we play sports. Now, we're in competition all day, like you said. And so if we come home, we don't want to be in competition with our woman, right? We don't want to be judged by her, number one, and we don't want to be in competition with her, number two. So if you can remember that, if you seek to understand and see where he's coming from, then it'll change how you handle situations at home.
So what do you think, Troy, stood out for you? I know you said you knew your wife back in college, but what do you think stood out for you about her from other women that you knew that made you know that she's the kind of woman you wanted to serve and to marry and to be committed to in partnership?
So my wife had a lot of great attributes, right? So, I mean, she was intelligent and she was driven and ambitious and, the things you like in a person. But the thing that drove me to her the most was her spirit. Right? She had this spirit about her that was always optimistic, always finding the best in things, never really negative Nancy at all. And she had a vibe about her, an aura that if you were around her, you couldn't be mad around her. Right? You just can't be mad around her because she just has a spirit like that, where it's like she's always glass half full. You see, that kind of person. And for me, a lot of times in my life, I was a glass half empty type of guy. And so she bought this side out of me that I didn't have. Right. And so that, to me, that was what made me really, really attracted to her.
Yeah. So it was not, even though she has a lot of attributes, and I noticed you spoke about her attributes in terms of who she is, not so much about what she looks like, although I'm sure she's beautiful. But it was really about who she was being and who she was showing up as in the world.
Absolutely. 100%. I mean, she's a beautiful woman, but those things drove me to her way more than other things.
Yeah, I like that. That's really, really beautiful, and a nice compliment to her, and a nice compliment for you that you were able to recognize those things. Because I think a lot of times women have this perception, and I know I'm sure, talked to women about this from time to time, that all men are looking for is the physical attributes. If we don't look like the model on the magazine or the Barbie doll, or we're over 40, then out of luck.
Look, let me tell you something. It's funny you bring this up, right? Because women compete with other women so much. They don't even realize that it's not the men they're competing for. They're competing against other women, right? Because realistically, have you ever noticed that a lot of times the person who gets married to that man that's the handsome guy or whatever, she's not always the supermodel?
Yeah.
right? She's not always the supermodel. There's a reason for that. It's because we aren't as shallow as y'all think we are. Right? Women think that men are so shallow. We like physical, yes, we do. We love it, right? We like the magazine covers and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to building a life with someone, we look for way more than that, right? We look for way more than that. And I think because of that, you have to really understand that where a man is coming from. Seek to understand, right? You don't have to be the supermodel all the time. What you do have to do is have a beautiful spirit, because there are a lot of pretty women that have really ugly spirits, right? And no man wants to be around that all day. You know what? A lot of men, if you talking to a bunch of men in a circle, one thing when a man talks about his woman, he'll say, "Man, she's just fun to be around. She's just cool. I enjoy being around her." Right? That's what we say. It's not always she has the nicest set of breasts or the nicest, backside or whatever it is. It's always we just have fun together, and that's it.
Yeah, and I've also heard men say that he feels good around her. She makes him feel good. She makes him feel admired, respected, like she trusts him, she appreciates him. And like you said, there's a lot of very beautiful women that may not make him feel like that. They may be beautiful to look at, but in terms of a life partner, someone to marry, someone that you want to commit to, I love that you're saying that men are not as shallow as we sometimes think they are.
No, we are. And here's the thing to think about is when a man is mature, right? That's the difference. Sometimes you might be talking to an immature guy who all he cares about is what she looks like. But when men are mature, they understand that there's something bigger to it, because what happens with the looks? With anybody, I always tell people, Beyonce to Jay-Z is just a normal woman. They've been together a long time, right? So we look at her and she's like this most beautiful thing on earth. But he looks at her every day. So he's used to her. You see what I mean? And so we got to have something deeper than just how you look, because at some point lust wears off, right?
Right.
So only mature men understand that, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. I love that you share a lot of things uniquely from your male perspective and from your own experience. And wow, teach me how to love. I mean, really, if we all could be taught how to love more profoundly, what a difference that would make in the world, right?
Man. Well, the thing is, people don't understand is that love is an action, right? It's a verb. It's something you do. So if it's something you do, you have to learn how to do it better. It doesn't just happen, right? Lust is the feeling. Love is the action. And so I think we have to invest in it in order to get really good at it.
Yeah, and yet there's this perception that we should all automatically know how to do it. And of course, how's that working for a lot of us, right?
I know. So, as soon as the lust is over, then it's like, what do I do now?
Exactly, exactly. So I love that you're up to teaching people how to love. I think that's I mean, if we could learn one thing in life, what would be more important than that? So thank you for the work you're doing in the world, and also for this really interesting and fun conversation. I've loved speaking with you as well. So I thank you for your contribution and for sharing so generously.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I thank you for having me. It's been so great.
Yeah. So do you want to leave us with one last parting thought?
I would love to. Two things to think about, and I tell people this. There's a chapter in my new book. It's called Be the One, right? And the premise of that is stop searching for the one and instead just be the one, right? If you can be the one, everything else will fall into place. Now, the second thought is this. When it's right, it's easy, right? When it's right, it's easy. And just to expand on that a little bit, too many times we make love hard. We make dating hard. But when it's the right person, it's easy. So keep that in mind and stop trying to force things to happen. Instead, when it's right, it'll be easy.
Wow, I can't tell you how much I love those two parting thoughts. It's funny, my program is called Be the One Woman, and it goes right in alignment with what you're talking about, because we can do all the right things outwardly, but if we're not being that person, that presence, that light that we want to attract in the world, like you described your beautiful wife, we're not going to draw in that right partner. And and the thing about it being easy, I can remember as I was going through all of my dating for decades, is what I called it, all of my experiences, I would have people from time to time say, when it's right, things will just naturally, gracefully fall into place. And of course, my inner cynic was coming out after
all those years, right?
And saying, yeah, right. And I've got some oceanside property here in Utah to sell you as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is, when I did meet my husband, things did just naturally and gracefully progress and fall into place. And it was amazing to me. So, the last laugh was on me, because that is exactly how it happened after all of those years of what felt like struggle. So I just can't even tell you how much I resonate with what you just shared there as our parting thoughts. Thank you so much for that.
No, thank you so much. I hope it impacts someone out there. Someone's making it hard right now, and it should be easy.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. See, that's the other great thing about men. You can say things so much more concisely than I can as well.
Hey, that's why we need each other, right?
Right. It takes me a paragraph to get out what you can say in a sentence.
No worries. I love it. I love it.
So I want to thank you, Troy. And I also want to thank each of you for joining us for this interview. And Troy, blessings and thank you to you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye for now.